A close race in Malaysia's upcoming elections. The vote is seen as the toughest test of the ruling coalition's 56-year grip on power in Southeast Asia's third largest economy, Malaysia, and its changing political landscape. This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. And Malaysians go to the polls on Sunday in what promises to be one of the tightest elections in the country's history. So what is at stake? Well, the opposition is trying to unseat the ruling National Front coalition, which, with over 50 years in power, is one of the world's longest-serving governments. This time, though, the Pakatan Rakyat Alliance, Malaysia's main opposition, has a real chance of winning. They say the National Front has been in power too long and has promised to scrap their authoritarian style of rule and fight corruption. Now, this election pits two characters against each other as well, so let's take a moment to tell you a little more about them. Najib Razak is the current Prime Minister. His National Front coalition's been in power, as we said, since 1957. Najib himself took over in 2009 following a disastrous election for the coalition, which lost its two-thirds majority in parliament. And Najib will be highlighting Malaysia's strong economic growth under his stewardship, as well as his handouts to poorer Malaysians as a reason for re-election. On the other side, Anwar Ibrahim is leader of the opposition and a former deputy prime minister. Fired from office in 1998 and tried for abuse of power and having sex with a man, Anwar spent 6 years in jail but was eventually cleared of the sodomy charge. He was also acquitted of new allegations of sodomy last year. He's called all the charges politically motivated. Anwar is pledging to tackle government authoritarianism and corruption. He's promising to cut taxes, increase subsidies, and address complaints of discrimination against minority ethnic Chinese and Indians. One group likely to have a big impact on Sunday's vote is Malaysia's youth. Young people make up 42% of the electorate. And as Florence Louis reports, all parties are doing their best to court the youth vote.
He's the incumbent Prime Minister of Malaysia, but he'd like people to think he's also just a regular guy. A guy who plays prank calls and goes to youth concerts. That's Najib Razak, trying to shore up his cool credentials. With 1 in 5 voters below the age of 30, that's probably not a bad strategy.
They really are the wild card in the Malaysian electorate because they don't have strong party affiliations, unlike their parents.
And because social media is such a popular form of communication among the young, the campaign is also being fought on the internet. The ruling coalition has set up a cyber youth team, training more than 2,000 so-called cyber activists.
We were also tasked to counter false allegation, slanders by the opposition. And also we are asked to disseminate information to the people.
The opposition coalition, long denied fair access to newspapers and broadcast stations, has made the internet their home and made huge gains in the last election. Political rallies are often streamed live, and YouTube videos remind voters of the issues at stake, such as corruption and cronyism. We're also seeing a more fun side to politics emerging. Take, for example, this game, Conquest of Putrajaya. The characters resemble politicians. This guy here looks like the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, the teams battle each other using ink squirters and other weapons to try and take over as many states as possible to form the next government. There's also a card game modelled on Malaysian politics.
And you're going to give me two more
right down to voter demographics and the political tactics. It's meant to show how flawed the system has become and get young voters thinking about what matters to them.
I'll look at two things. What issues are they advocating for and what their track record is.
With old strategies no longer working and the rules of engagement changing, this election is bound to be a close one. Florence Louis, Al Jazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
Well, joining us now to talk more about this are our guests in Kuala Lumpur. Yin Shao Loong, Research Director at the Institut Rakyat. Loong is also the author of the New Malaysian Essays. Also in Kuala Lumpur, Bunn Nagara. He's a Senior Fellow at the ISIS, that's the Institute of Strategic and International Studies. And joining us via Skype from Singapore is Michael Vatikiotis. He's the Asia Director for the Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue and has been based in Asia for 20 years. Welcome all of you. Now, Yin Shao Loong, let me kick things off with you, and I want to ask you, the opposition has the chance here to do something that no one has done in Malaysia since 1957, unseat one of the world's longest running continually elected governments. Is it fair to say this may be the best chance they'll ever have?
Well, I don't know about ever, but it's certainly the best chance historically so far. It's down neck and neck as of today. A new poll put out by the Merdeka Centre for Opinion Research has both coalitions running neck and neck around 42–43% approval.
And why do you think that is? I mean, clearly the government is in a real fight here to defend its turf. There's a perception that they've got a lot to answer for. Why is the opposition in such a strong position to really turn a page on history here in Malaysia?
Well, there's several factors. The government has been around for over 50 years now, and over that time it has declined. And it's declined in a number of areas. One, in terms of governance, the degree of corruption within the government has increased. The degree of distance from the ordinary person on the street or in the village has also increased, and they become more distant and more out of touch. At the same time, the talent pool within the ruling coalition has also declined as well, and they've been forced to either recycle or to completely field untried rookies in this current election. And so they've never been as weak as they are now. And the Malaysian electorate has also changed. They've become much less conservative, tradition-bound, more demanding about quality governance, expecting more economic performance and a more equal and equitable distribution of economic wealth. And so these sort of factors have played into the hands of a resurgent parliamentary opposition that has, for the first time, really formed a very strong coalition to counter the ruling coalition. They've managed to put together their own manifesto. They've successfully ruled 5 state governments, especially since the last general election in 2008, including the economic powerhouses of Selangor State and Penang State as well.
Bunn Nagara, what about the accusations that we've heard in Malaysia about the continued cronyism and favoritism towards ethnic Malays and things like handouts, government positions and so on? That policy has undoubtedly helped to keep them in power, but aren't you concerned about the long-term impact that this is having in Malaysia?
Well, I wouldn't say that those policies have, or practices rather, have kept anyone in power, because they are, by right, unpopular. And where they are found
well, they're clearly popular
exist,
with the people who've benefited from them, though, aren't they?
Which is obviously by definition would be cliques, rather than the majority of people who go out and vote. So they would be unpopular, and I think it happens on both sides as well. The party that is in Mr. Anwar's camp was in UMNO before. And I think nobody is blameless, although the incumbents tend to be in the bigger picture because they have been, dominating the political scene and therefore have more levers at hand to implement those practices.
But just to come back to this, Bunn Nagara, there is a criticism. One of the criticisms of this particular policy, what has been perceived as a kind of affirmative action type policy, if you will, is that the effect that it's had in terms of the brain drain that has left the country, which has been intensifying with more than 1 million of its citizens, for example, mainly ethnic Chinese, living in Singapore now. They say that they're not getting the opportunities that they feel they should be getting in their own country, and that's why so many of them have moved out. This is clearly something that the government needs to address, isn't it?
Yes, obviously. You see, I would distinguish between the affirmative action policies and cronyism and so on, which are are not desirable for any country. You see, affirmative action is all right within limits, such as time limits, and we've had that. So it's clearly time to open up the practices, the markets, and generally relationships that are economic in nature largely, and to have a freer, I think, dependent kind of relationship that is more open and transparent at the same time. I think this campaign in particular has shown the public demand and desire for greater openness and transparency, and there's no doubt about that.
Michael Vatikiotis, what do you think are the main issues at stake here as Malaysians go to the polls? What is the fundamental choice that is facing them on Sunday?
Well, apart from the ones that have already been mentioned and the usual sort of bread and butter issues, I think there's a fundamental issue that has come out in this in the lead up to this campaign, because the official campaign itself has been very short, but in fact the lead up to this election and the unofficial campaign has been long and very interesting. And I think one of the fundamental factors is that there is a mood in the Malaysian electorate now that it's time to be rid of the bonds of the past. And many of the bonds, the main bond of the past was essentially the ethnic and racial and religious straitjackets into which people felt themselves constrained. They had to vote. If you were an Indian, you felt you had to vote for the Malaysian Indian Congress. If you were Chinese, that you voted for the MCA, or one of the Chinese opposition parties. Now people feel that they really have a choice. Their vote counts. It's important. And they want to make a choice based on what they see as the best for the future of the country. And to some extent, it's not about whether they like the opposition or whether they like the Barisan Nasional. It's whether they think that a change of government will be actually good for the country, in the way that traditional democracies feel that changing government means that you get rid of the arrogance of power, that you look for fresh faces with new ideas. I think there's a real sense in Malaysia that now is the time, as we saw in 2008 when this shift first started to happen, now is the time for the voters to sort of decide who they want to govern the country, rather than the rhetoric and the propaganda of, you know, if you don't vote for the government, you're not safe.
Yin Shao Loong, I saw you nodding in agreement to some of that. Is that a sentiment that you agree with? That the ethnic divisions is something that people are making too much of now? That those barriers are slowly coming down?
Yes, I think we've seen a tremendous shift from a very race-based politics, where in order to succeed in Malaysian politics, you had to arrange and organize your party around a racial identity. Now that's no longer the case. Of course, the ruling incumbent Barisan Nasional government still operates on that philosophy, but they have been very resistant to any form of reform. In terms of the insurgent opposition, you have parties which are established not on a race basis, but also on an ideological basis, on the principle of justice, on the principle of accountability, of more equality. And so that's responding to a shift within the demographic of the Malaysian society. And people are tired of race baiting because it's fear-mongering, and people just kind of want to move on. They want to focus on economic bread and butter issues, getting a career, getting a job, getting a house, without having to face racial or ethnic barriers.
Let's talk a little bit more about the economic issues then. Bunn Nagara, what are these fundamental economic bread and butter issues then that are facing Malaysian voters?
Well, there's always the gap between the rich and the poor, which, you know, by right should be narrowed as much as possible. Accompanying that, there is also the issue of corruption, which is also incidentally economic in nature. And when people have grievances in these areas and they combine together, especially at election time, then these tend to be very explosive issues which have a potential for making or breaking a party's hold on power.
Well, Malaysia is an ethnically and religiously diverse country, as we said. Let's talk a little bit more about that now. This will play a big role in the upcoming elections. Malaysia is home to almost 29 million people and consists of three main ethnic groups. Ethnic Malays make up 60% of the population. They are the most dominant group in politics. Ethnic Chinese, who form around a quarter of the population, are the second biggest group. The Chinese are the wealthiest community in Malaysia. They hold the economic power. Indians and indigenous people make up the rest. To what extent then, Michael Vatikiotis, did these ethnic lines have such an influence on the electoral makeup of the country, particularly when you go back as far as the 1970s, when many of the policies of the current government were put in place, many people say to favour ethnic Malays?
Well, that's indeed the case. And really the history of all this goes back to the affirmative action that was really laid in place at independence, where the British insisted, along with the Malays, that there should be some sort of guarantee for the Malays to, if you like, sort of catch up with the more advanced economic expertise and acumen of the Chinese and other minorities, whom in fact the British had brought in to run the economy and operate various aspects of Malaysia in the colonial era, Malaya. Now, if you accelerate away from that, you have a development of a power base that's centered around the United Malay National Organization, UMNO, which is at the core of the Barisan, which has always, I think, felt that they are the leading element of this coalition. The UMNO of the Malay Party is going to make all the decisions to preserve and protect that privileged position. And now, of course, over the years, what's happened is that a very important and often neglected aspect of this is that the proportions of ethnicity in Malaysia have shifted considerably. The Malay population has increased tremendously. The Chinese population has shrunk, and not just because the Malays may have had more children, but because a lot of Chinese have left. And the Indian population has become a smaller minority as a result, probably less than 8%. And so what this has meant is that this need for affirmative action and on a purely demographic scale has become kind of less evident because the Malays are very much a majority and they have all the levers of bureaucratic, to some extent, very important economic power as well. And so there's a questioning in other areas of the country about whether we really need to have these same policies in place.
Yin Shao Loong, we heard in our report there, just at the top of the program, about the importance of courting the youth vote for both sides in this, and the point was made there that they are really the sort of X factor in all of this, that they could be a real swing vote here. How important is the youth population in this election, given how close this race is?
It's absolutely critical because it is an X factor. They're usually, for the most part, first-time voters. So neither coalition knows which way they will swing. They have yet to, they're just starting out in terms of their careers, and it seems to be economic issues that are most pressing for them. They won't have the historical memory of their parents about some of the excesses of the past. But they will be finding constrained by the current political and economic environment, which basically puts them in a situation where they're looking at fairly stagnant salaries and quite low salaries coming out of university, if they can even get to university. There's been ethnic quotas on entrance into the university, which have frozen some of them out. A lot of them may be saddled with heavy debts from university. It's almost impossible for a young person or young couple to even dream of buying a home in terms of the first 5 years out of college. So these are critical demographics for both political coalitions to court, and both the Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Rakyat have attempted to put out proposals and manifestos that will appeal to the more kind of economically vulnerable side of the young.
Bunn Nagara, if we look at Prime Minister... yeah, go ahead.
A crucial test.
Go ahead, sorry, if you wanted to finish.
Sorry. No, I think it's going to be a crucial test of what our national education system has been able to inculcate in terms of any capacity for critical thinking amongst the youth, because we've had very politically controlled universities here. The government has intervened directly in them. It's illegal, or has been illegal for many, many, many years for students to partake in political activity, and many students have been expelled for showing political inclination away from the ruling government. So the ability to freely exercise free speech and criticism has been suppressed. That's not to say that people can't think critically privately, but this election, I think, will be a crucial demonstration of that ability by the youth.
All right. Bunn Nagara, how much of this is riding on, if we look at the Prime Minister, Najib Razak, how much of this is riding on him? I mean, let's say for the sake of argument that his coalition were to hold on and win this, but very narrowly and by an even lesser margin than he did in 2008. Does he get to still hold on to his job? And how much uncertainty will there be over his policy?
Well, that's for now at least. It seems to be an open question because the threat to his position in the party as president of UMNO would certainly increase, and that consequently will also mean his position as Prime Minister of the country. So we will definitely have to see, and this is a very exciting election for that respect and others as well. I think there will be pressures within the party to replace him, even if he were to win a a majority, but a very small majority. So I think he has tried very hard in the past few months to try to allay some of those conditions. But unfortunately, I think issues like the rising cost of living, which is a problem for many Malaysians, especially the younger generation, and his solution to that has been to develop a high-income nation for Malaysia. The problem there is that these solutions take a long time to mature and to take effect, to be evident and experienced by people. So in the meantime, in a matter of months or even a couple of years, you may not see the results. So that adds to the pressure for the government to deliver. And the problem is, of course, the expectations are greater for things to develop, and the results are much sooner than the policies that can make them do that.
All right, let's give you an idea of the kind of reaction that we've gotten on our Facebook page, because when we posed this question, and let's get a view from a couple of people. Shaz Shahar says, definitely this election will be the hardest one for Barisan Nasional, that's the ruling coalition, and might be the most important in their 57 years of election history. Laili Shah Arifin says Malaysia is plagued with chronic corruption and it needs a new breed of leaders to set it right again. I am rooting for the People's Coalition headed by Anwar Ibrahim to steer the leadership. The National Coalition, with its mammoth election machinery, could not halt the rise of the people's craving for change. Let's talk a little bit more then about Anwar Ibrahim, Michael Vatikiotis. I mean, this is basically seen as his last chance to get back into government. But if, for the sake of argument, his group were to win, the criticism that's been made of them is that they're barely hanging together by a thread. I mean, there are a lot of strange bedfellows in this opposition coalition. I mean, how much confidence is there that they can keep that together if they were to go into government?
I think the first thing to say is that both sides, both coalitions, are composed of strange bedfellows, to use that term. And the coalition governments in Malaysia are always difficult to manage. Don't forget, we're talking about a Westminster-style parliament here. It's possible for people to cross the aisle. If the Pakatan, the PR coalition, the opposition coalition, does win a very slender majority, I think we're going to see a lot of horse trading in the weeks before a government can be formed, and it may not be a done deal. However, just to say a little bit about Anwar, I mean, it's important to remember that, of course, he was a deputy prime minister, a finance minister in a government under former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad in the 90s. He was a rising star in UMNO. He was more or less forced into the opposition when Dr. Mahathir felt that he was trying to usurp power and expelled him from the party. So he's had experience in government. He was seen as a very smooth operator in government. On the one hand, very much taking an intellectual approach to many issues. On the other hand, quite good at exercising power. And so we're not talking about someone who's never really had experience in government. And as for the strange bedfellows in his coalition, I mean, I think that the parties, the component parties, one of them, the DAP, the Democratic Action Party, has been one of the oldest parties in Malaysia, and certainly has its long experience in politics, in parliamentary politics, in the debate of government policies. They've run the state of Penang, and I think that's important.
All right, on that note, we're going to have to leave it. We are out of time. The elections are on Sunday. We will wait to see what does transpire from that. But for the moment, I want to thank all three of our guests in Kuala Lumpur, Yin Shao Loong and Bunn Nagara, and Michael Vatikiotis in Singapore. And thank you for joining us on another edition of Inside Story. Remember, if you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.